Is emergency management. Emergency management is more complex than one might think. It is often misrepresented and foggy in the eyes of the public. There are three pieces that make up the emergency management puzzle. They are the academic discipline, the distributed function, and the emerging profession. Management is a managerial function charged with creating the framework within humans, organizations, and government reduce vulnerability to hazards and cope with hazard events. The study of how human beings create, interact, and cope with hazards, vulnerabilities, and associated events. The discipline focuses on how humans cope with hazard events through preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. Tasks and activities that make up an emergency management program are distributed across entities and organizations with the responsibility and capability to perform them. The distributed function is made up of the creators, the interactors, and those who cope. The Control Act of 1934 gave the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers increased authority to design and build flood control projects. The Civil Defense Act of 1950 established the Federal Civil Defense Administration, who with limited funding provided technical support and guidance. FEMA was created in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. When FEMA first started, it had few regulatory powers, a small staff, and an equally small budget. The Effort Act of 1988 was an amended version of the Disaster Relief Act of 1974. It created a system of presidential declaration as well as defined the types of events that it covered. It also authorized three types of assistance: the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program, and the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program. It also established cost-sharing requirements between the federal government and states. As time went on, the federal government started to focus more on mitigation and recovery instead of just preparedness and response. We are seeing more events that have greater impact due to changes in climate like rising sea levels and temperatures, as well as increased population densities in urban areas. These factors led to the federal government creating the National Flood Insurance Act. This spawned the National Flood Insurance Program as well as the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. In the 1990s, the federal government spent $25.4 billion on disaster response. This was more than 4 of the previous decades combined. Even though response is considered the exciting phase of emergency management, it only lasts up to 72 hours. Recovery, however, lasts much longer than that. Some communities can take years to fully recover. With this in mind, responsibility for recovery shifted towards state and federal government. In 2011, the FEMA released the National Disaster Recovery Framework, which serves as a companion document to the National Response Framework. The NDRF is a guide to promote effective recovery, particularly for those incidents that are large-scale or catastrophic. It should be noted that recovery is not returning to normal, it's self-sustainability. Why should you care? Local, state, and federal government levels are the main players in any emergency management context. Life is extremely important to be protective of, and the fate of the people is the government's most important role. Legality is also important as they can be held accountable if they don't act and know something is wrong. Saving money is crucial, and proper mitigation efforts can be extremely cost-effective. The number of events is on the rise, and being unprepared would prove catastrophic in the end. Emergency management is currently underfunded, misunderstood, and the implementation of the frameworks is poor. It's also not very sexy. It's been an episode of Cody, Kyle, and Callum. Thanks for tuning in.